If one didn't know that the following game was played in the USSR Championship, one could have thought that this attacking masterpiece was created by no one other than Paul Morphy, as Mark Taimanov, who actually carried out this attack, sacrificed his queen on move 12 in order to finish his development as soon as possible and launch a devastating attack on the enemy king with all remaining pieces. Taimanov started with d4 and his opponent Polugaevsky played d5, c4, d takes c. The queen's gambit accepted. And after knight f3, knight f6, the common move would be e3 of course, opening the light-squared bishop's diagonal. But in our game, instead, Taimanov wanted to surprise his opponent and instead of common e3, made a rare move, queen a4 check instead. And Polugaevsky's reaction wasn't the correct one. Instead of knight c6, which was proposed by Taimanov in his annotations, and after queen takes c4, bishop f5, as you see in this variation, black has very good development and the control of the important central square. Instead of this, instead of knight c6, Polugaevsky played knight d7, which, according to Taimanov, is too passive, the knight is pinned, and, which is very important, now black cannot prevent white from occupying the center by playing e4. So Taimanov isn't going to waste a tempo by capturing on c4 with his queen, instead he will occupy the center, open the light-squared bishop's diagonal and capture on c4 with his bishop. So, of course, at the moment e4 doesn't work because the black knight controls this square, that's why first Taimanov develops his knight and after e6 occupies the center, e4. And black immediately attacks white's pawn center, c5. And in case white makes the natural move, namely bishop takes c4, black would simply destroy white's center by capturing on d4, and after knight takes d4, black would develop his bishop with tempo, attacking the knight, and after white defends the knight, black would castle kingside and the position would be equal. So, in order to fight for the advantage in the opening, white must play d5, which is exactly what Taimanov did, crossing the center of the board in order to grab space. After black captured, Taimanov continues his strategy. Now the e-pawn crosses the center of the board, attacking the knight, and in case the knight retreats, the d5 pawn would fall. That's why, instead of moving his knight, Polugaevsky counter-attacked the white knight in his turn. But this move turned out to be a serious mistake. Instead of d4, after the game, it was suggested by Keres to play b5, which wasn't an easy move to find. Now, the idea is, of course, as the black pieces aren't developed, now the idea of b5 is to develop the rook with tempo. White must capture the pawn, and now black develops his rook with tempo, attacking the queen, and after the queen retreats, later in the game black can always play rook b4, attacking the queen and kicking it out from this diagonal, after which the knight, the d7 knight, would be unpinned. But instead of this, black made a more natural looking move, d4, counter-attacking the knight. Taimanov continues his development. He leaves his knight under attack because he is also attacking the black knight. So he develops his bishop. Bishop takes c4 and d takes c, e takes f, and queen takes f6 followed. Now, as you see, black pieces aren't developed, while white has already developed two of his minor pieces. And now he develops his last minor piece with tempo. Bishop g5, attacking the queen. And queen c6 followed. And we have reached the critical position. So, the white queen is under attack, and by playing queen c6, black offered the exchange of the queens, after which white's tremendous pressure would ease a little bit. If white makes a natural looking move, namely bishop b5, attacking the queen and increasing the pressure on the pinned knight, as the bishop would leave the c4 square, it wouldn't control the e6 square anymore, and black would have played queen e6 check, followed by bishop e7, and in this variation black could have continued the resistance. So white must find something else. And that's exactly what Taimanov did. He found a brilliant solution. You can pause the video and try to find his next move. I will just give you a small tip. What white pieces aren't playing at the moment, and what are the ideal squares for these pieces, and how to bring them into play in the fastest possible way. So the pieces that aren't playing, of course, are the rooks, and the ideal squares for these rooks would be d1 and e1. On these squares they would be placed on the open files, and that would be simply deadly for the black king, because the king doesn't have any squares to move. e7 and d8 are under the control of the bishop. So Taimanov leaves his queen under attack and castles queenside. Now his one rook is already on d1, greatly placed, and as the king moved away from e1, now the e1 square is vacated for the second rook. And if white plays rook e1 check, that would simply be deadly. That's why black actually cannot accept the sacrifice. In case black captures on a4, of course, white would play rook e1 check. Black would have the only move, bishop e7, and after rook takes e7 check, the king cannot go to d8 because it will fall under the double discovered check. Rook takes d7 check and followed by checkmate. That's why after rook takes e7 check, the king must go to f8, but now the rook coordinates with the bishop very well, so the rook would capture on f7 check. And again, if the king moves to e8, then simply rook e1 check would follow, and the king doesn't have any moves. The only move is knight e5, rook takes e5 check, the king still cannot move, bishop e6 the only move, and after bishop takes e6, of course, black is losing on the spot, the king doesn't have any squares, and deadly retreat of the bishop is threatened with the discovered check. So black king would be checkmated in this variation. That's why after rook takes f7 check, the king must move to g8, but on g8 it is placed right under attack of the bishop. So white would capture the knight with the discovered check. In case the king moves to f8, it's checkmated in a few moves, rook d8 check, then rook takes e8 check, and rook d8 checkmate. That's why after rook takes d7 check, black must capture the bishop, but now the geometry of the chessboard. Rook d8 check, king f7, and the fork would follow. Knight e5 check, and black is losing the queen. After king e6, knight takes c4, white would simply be up a piece. So after the long castle, black cannot accept the sacrifice. That's why Polugaevsky captures on b2. Now Taimanov could have played king b1, but instead he simply captured the pawn, which is also perfectly playable. And black plays bishop e7. Black still cannot capture the queen, of course. And black hopes to castle kingside. But of course Taimanov doesn't allow that. Now, of course, rook e1 followed, pinning the bishop and simply threatening to capture it. That's why black plays f6. And now bishop b5, increasing the pressure on the pinned knight. Now, after the queen retreats, the knight would be attacked 3 times. In case the queen moves to c7 in order to defend the knight, then a simple move, bishop f4, saving the bishop with tempo, attacking the queen, and of course the bishop is protected. So white is winning. That's why black played queen b6 instead, pinning the bishop. But a quiet move followed, king c1, unpinning his bishop and renewing the threat. d7 will fall, and there is nothing black can do to defend it. That's why Polugaevsky captures on g5, and Taimanov, of course, captures on d7. Now black cannot capture, because after queen takes d7 check, the king must move and the bishop falls, so white would be up a piece and continue a devastating attack. That's why after bishop takes d7 check, the king moves to f8. So, how to continue the attack? Of course, in the most energetic way. The exchange sacrifice followed. Rook takes e7 in order to start the king hunt. Now the black king is forced to move towards the center of the board. Queen e4 check. If the king moves to f7, then of course knight takes g5 check, followed by checkmate in a few moves would follow. If the king moves to f6, then of course queen e5 check, and again the checkmate will come soon. That's why black king moved to d8, but on d8 it's right under attack again, so the discovered check followed. Bishop f5 check, king c7 and queen e5 check, king c6, rook d6 check, king b5 and queen b2 check. What to do now? If the king moves to a4, then simply bishop c2 check, king a5, queen a3 check, king b5 and queen a4 checkmate. And in case the king moves to a5 instead of a4, then a beautiful checkmate would follow. Queen a3 check, king b5. Now, if white plays bishop d3 check, then black can play c4. That's why first white would distract the pawn. Knight d4 check, the pawn must leave c5, and now bishop d3 would be checkmate. That's why after queen b2 check, Polugaevsky resigned. And now I recommend watching another game by Taimanov, in which he makes use of space advantage by playing on the both sides of the board. But first, like this video and subscribe, as it's really helpful for the channel growth.